Afternoon. We are live. Shalom, this is Rabbi Sachs of the Chai Center, and welcome to the Chai Academy. Now, the Chai Academy is a series of classes of different interesting topics, and for the past few weeks, we have been studying Maimonides. So Maimonides, many different books, but the book that specifically we're studying is from his Mishneh Torah, as he calls it, the review of the Torah, and we're studying the laws of Mada, the laws of knowledge. And as he puts it, this is the foundation of everything and anything. So the first part of Mada, Maimonides discussed the knowledge of God, how God created all, how everything, every single, anything you see in this world is a creation of God, and it is nothing but God. And if anybody feels independent, then that's just, it's not reality. It's just, they feel independent. But as far as God doesn't have any extension of himself, or rather, God is not a composite. There's nothing added to God. Everything is just an extension of God, and there is nothing new to God. God has no knowledge external of Himself. Capital H. Then Maimonides, and he went into angels, and he went into free will. He went into four elements, which are the basis of creation. And we discussed them, how it applies to everything, including the human being. We're made up of four elements physically and spiritually. And that was the class yesterday. Today he goes into a topic also under the banner of Mada, because it's such a fundamental topic. So he talks about making a Kiddush Hashem and not making a Chilul Hashem. That's how he starts. A Kiddush Hashem is the sanctification of God's name. A Chilul Hashem is a desecration of God's name. And the best thing a person could do is sanctify God's name, and the worst thing a person can do is desecrate God's name. And even better than sanctifying God's name is if you sanctify it in public. And the worse than desecrating God's name is desecrating God's name in public. So then he starts giving scenarios, and this is such a fundamental. This is taught in yeshiva, but it's taught in elementary school because it's such a fundamental. So he says, if somebody comes over to the person, here he talks about specifically the Jewish person, and it says, look, but it can be extrapolated to non-Jews as well. It goes, look, I know you have certain laws that you have to keep. And he says, I want you to and coerces you. He goes, I demand of you that you make me a pot of stew on Shabbat. If not, I will kill you. So we all know cooking on Shabbat is not allowed. It's a biblical command. Or the person comes over and says, if you circumcise your child, you'll be put to death. So what should the person do? So Maimonides says that all the mitzvahs in the Torah, bar 3, all the mitzvahs, so the 613 biblical mitzvahs, and they have their rabbinical offshoots, and they have their safeguards, etc. One mitzvah can mean a number of things, by the way. Rest on Shabbat has many, it's multifaceted, that mitzvah, many offshoots. But let's take those scenarios. Make me a stew on Shabbat. If not, so the Jewish person says it's Shabbat. He says, if you don't do it, I will kill you. So Maimonides says, and this is the law, make the stew. You are not obligated to die. If he tells you if you circumcise your child, today I will kill you. So Don't circumcise the child. Wait till tomorrow. Wait till he's gone. Wait till whenever. Right? So that is that is the story. Says a person has to not care about the violation and make the fellow the stew. Don't circumcise your child. I'm using both scenarios of do and don't. Right? So don't circumcise your child because you're not obligated to die for God. You're not obligated to die for God. And if you can live yet another day, that's more important than you violating this particular Shabbat or you having this child not circumcised. Maimonides says, however, there are 3 mitzvahs where you have to die. And by the way, Maimonides says, if a person says, well, no, I'm going to not make the stew and I don't care, and he gets shot and killed, he says, you're responsible for your own self there because you're allowed to violate the Shabbat. We're going to clarify that in a moment. Maimonides continues. He says there are three mitzvahs that one has to, that one has to, okay, can you put poison in the stew? Not can you should put poison. But there are 3 mitzvahs that if you're asked to violate, you must not violate. The first one is murder. If you're told, kill that person, or I will kill you, you have to say, I'm not killing that person. He says, but I will kill you. Sorry. I'll kill your spouse. I'm not doing it. I will kill this one and that one. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I am not going to murder somebody that is taking away someone's life. And you're going to have to follow through on your threat. But I'm not killing anybody. Likewise, if the person says bow down to this idol or worship this particular form of worship that is the antithetical to worshiping God, then you have to say, I'm not doing it. I refuse to do it. And you're gonna I will kill you. You have to be killed. And the third one is if the person tells you that I need you to commit incest, or hand us this pretty maiden, or hand us all your maidens, or any do this, something to do with sex, and it's wrong and it's off. You have to say, look, I'm not handing you this pretty maiden. Come get her. I may kill you, you may kill me, but I am not handing over this maiden. So those 3 things. So it's murder, idolatry, and sexual stuff, rape, incest, things like that. You have to die. You have to die. So if somebody puts a gun to your head and said, kill him or you die, you have to die. So that is the basic idea. And Maimonides says that those who were forced to, in the Spanish Inquisition, for example, he lived before the Spanish Inquisition, but this idea that those who were told bow down to the cross, right? It was a terrible period of time where you say bow down to the cross or die. You had to say, you know what, I'm going to die. And actually the Jews then, and Maimonides actually does discuss it, even though not the Spanish Inquisition per se, but he does say in the chapter we're studying today, chapter 5 of Mada, he does say that, and this is what happened with the Spanish Inquisition, they were told that you had 3 choices. Convert to Catholicism and worship the cross and worship this and worship that. They were told, get out or die. So the choice, get out, Maimonides says you have to grab that choice. If you don't grab that choice, get out. He says then you will be culpable for your life. You will be held accountable because you had a choice to get out. So the other 2 choices are not really good choices because you have the choice of getting out. And that's what happened in the Spanish Inquisition. They were given until Tisha B'Av 1492 to get out. Those that said, I'm not getting out because I have my business here and I have my property here and I have my this is where my Porsche is here, and I'm not leaving without my Porsche. They were held accountable for their own lives because they could have gotten out. But let's say you couldn't get out. You were incarcerated to something else and you couldn't get out. And comes Tisha B'Av 1492, you couldn't get out prior. You must not accept that ultimatum. You have to say, you know what, kill me because I'm not doing it. And there were plenty throughout the Jewish history. I'm just going to hold on a second. Diane, can you close the door, please? Throughout our history of Jewish history, beginning in the times of the first temple and the story of the Maccabees, right? The story of the Hanukkah period and beyond, and the Hannah and her 7 sons, and even Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You know, the Torah alludes to some stuff that they refused to do, and it's there. It's always been there. So those are the three. Then Maimonides checks himself and qualifies. Maimonides says that if someone asks you, going back to the stew scenario, and by the way, if you have questions, you can ask and we'll attempt to answer it in the course of this class. But if you can always ask questions later, rabbi@thechaicenter.com. Maimonides qualifies something, and I think it's important to qualify. And he says as follows. He says that if the person comes and says, look, by the way, it could be Jew or Gentile for that matter. It doesn't have to be Gentile. You know, make the stew or die. You have to say, I'll make the stew because I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die for Shabbat. There's 3 things I'll die for, and I won't die for any of the other 3. He says that's true if it's just that scenario. But if it's a case where and it happened in the former Soviet Union, where it was a broad blanket thing. It wasn't because the non-Jew wanted to eat and it was for his satisfaction, but rather they put a kibosh on Jewish practice. They put a kibosh on all practices, for that matter. But they put a kibosh, and they said, no more circumcisions, or you face the gulag. So Maimonides says, if it is a kibosh on religion, not an individual person's stance, but rather it came from the government, the highest echelons in government, then you have to be ready to give up your life, because you cannot stop circumcision, right? You can, this one person's thorn in your side, that's one thing, but if it's this global decree, and Maimonides quotes Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple, who says, okay, Jews, you got to stop. Oh, the Hellenists, right? Okay, Jews, you got to stop. He says, you have to violate that decree. You have to say, no, I am not stopping circumcision for the next 30 years or for the foreseeable future. No, I'm not. So if it's just one person, 2 people, there's a couple of radical, who want to put a gun to your head. You have to ask the child first. Right? There is an anti-circumcision position out there, but if it comes from the government, right, you should sacrifice your life, and you should just totally ignore it. And that's what happened in Russia, in the Soviet Union. They came up, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you can't bake matzahs on Passover, you cannot circumcise your child, you're not allowed to study Torah, you're not allowed to do this, you can't have tefillin. And guess what? The Jewish people did not listen. I mean, I'm sure there was some that would listen, and definitely the ones that lived outside, outside the largest cities. There were just 1 or 2. There plenty of Jews fell through the cracks, right? Yeah, there's Jews in the 80s, the 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It depends. There was a group of Jews that were allowed out in the 70s. Then it stopped, and then Perestroika came. A lot of Jews were completely ignorant. They had no idea. Shtotekoya Sefer Torah, right? What is a Torah? They asked. So there were plenty of Jews that were caught up in this. But There were people that sacrificed their life because of this law. They sacrificed their life. They did continue with underground circumcisions. I mean, we once had a speaker, Rabbi Shane, who it was. I told him to write a book and call it The Cutting Edge. He talked about how he did circumcisions in the basement or in a tunnel, right? Or some high-ranking communist, the child of some high-ranking communist, had a son. So in other words, it was the grandchild, and he says, "I want my son circumcised. But if they do that, my father will be put in a gulag." And he's a high-ranking member, so they did it clandestinely, or they did it with the curtains closed, and it was all done through subterfuge and through passing papers, because this is what I'm saying. You cannot stop. You must not stop. So if God forbid, they came out with a decree to say you can no longer have kosher meat. You can no longer slaughter chickens and meat, right? So does that mean it's okay for us to go and get produced chicken? No. We either have to ship it in, right? If we can, like I believe Belgium, they started to outlaw meat and they started to outlaw circumcision. So you either got to cross the border for a circumcision or do it clandestinely. But you can't stop it. But if they ever came and said, so we would either slaughter clandestinely or we would settle for tofu. I personally would just eat vegetables. I'm not gonna eat tofu, no matter what. But so if it's a governmental thing, then we have to view it that just like we view the murder and the idolatry and the incest, the rape and the incest, we have to view it as that, because it came from the government, and we won't violate not one thing, because it's coming from the government. It's going to be the end of God's law. So therefore, that's why we need to violate. And Maimonides continues. Maimonides says that if you were killed because you believed in God and because you fulfilled God's will, or simply because you were Jew, there's no higher holiness than that. There's nothing holier than somebody who was killed because of their faith. So the 6 million that were killed, the millions that were killed in the first temple and second temple, and we're about to commemorate that. I was about to say celebrate. We're about to commemorate that on Tisha B'Av. There's nothing holier than somebody killed because they were Jewish. And even if they weren't asked to deny their faith, they were just killed because they were Jewish. That, Maimonides says, is a martyr of holiness. So somebody's walking in the streets of Brooklyn, and they're killed because somebody killed them because they saw, oh, that's a Jew, let me beat him, and they were killed. Or you think of the Pittsburgh massacre, the Poway massacre. That is, Maimonides says, there is nothing loftier than that. Now, Maimonides goes back and he says, so bottom line, if it's not a governmental thing, but rather, and you do say the person to the pot of stew that I am not going to make you the pot of stew, kill me. Maimonides says that's a fool. That's a fool, and you're held accountable because it's not a governmental thing. There was just this one person, and you should have just made the stew and live. Do it to live another day. And he continues, and he says, now, what happens? What happens if somebody, and this happened in 1492, right? The Spanish Inquisition. They were told bow down to the cross or die, right? The time to leave had ended, and now they can no longer leave. Bow down to the cross or die, and they bowed down to the cross. Right? What is the status? What is how? Maimonides says that while they should have died, it's true they should have died. I only bow down to God, right? I don't kneel to anybody, right? There was actually this week, right? I think a pitcher in a baseball team, when everybody was kneeling, he says, "I only kneel to God," and I thought to myself, touche, touche. I don't kneel to anybody. I kneel to God. I don't bend the knee to anybody other than God. And I thought this pitcher was right on, and hopefully I would have the strength. If I were a baseball player, as highly unlikely as it is, I would hope I would say no. I only bow to God. I'm not bowing to anybody or anything. Now, what happens if a person did bow? Did bow to the cross? It was 1492, and it was they held him and said, "It's your choice. Order the fate, burn or bow." And the person bowed. Maimonides says, it's unfortunate, it's horrible, it's horrific, but there's no punishment. Right? They're not going to get killed from heaven. They're not going to get lashes, because right, that it's only it's somebody's coerced. Somebody's coerced. It's a rachmanis. It's a pity. Now, if a person bows willingly, that person's soul is held in contempt, and that person is damaged goods spiritually. But if the person who was coerced to do it, Maimonides says, it's a horrific circumstance. Shouldn't have done it, but could you blame him? Could you blame him? And once again, Maimonides stresses, if you can run, you got to run. If you don't, if you have a chance to run, and you don't run to save your life, to save this predicament, then you are at fault. And I'm going back to the Spanish Inquisition because it was so unique, right? The three choices they were given, and many ran and lost everything, and many ran never. They ran to Portugal. If you know the history, they ran to Portugal. Then Portugal started with the same nonsense, and so they ran to Portugal. And even then, a couple years later, they weren't safe. And that is, by the way, if you think about it, if you know a little bit of the history, when they were the Jews that ran from Spain, and they ran from Portugal, where did they run to? So they ran to Morocco, right? They ran to Fez. They ran to there's in Morocco, you have the Spanish-speaking population, you have the French-speaking population. The Spanish-speaking population is where they ran to, because they ran from Spain, and they started almost like a colony of exiles. And when I was in Spain, I was in a synagogue in Spain, in Madrid, and someone gave a class on it, and and I had someone translate for me who spoke Spanish, and it was fascinating. So they all have relatives, all the Jews that came back, and there's not many. Where do they all come from? Right? Some didn't leave Spain, actually. It's an interesting story in itself. But they all came back from Morocco, and that's where they ran. So North Africa is actually the exiled Spanish Jews that had to leave in the times of the Inquisition. So you had something that Maimonides really talks about, that somebody who bowed down, even though they weren't really they weren't convinced, they were just coerced, and they were called the anusim, right? In Spain they were called Marrano Jews. Unfortunately, Marranos has a very negative connotation. Marranos, I believe means like hog or pig or something. The pigs that they bowed down, but they were really kept their faith. But Jews, we call them anusim. They're coerced. It's a pity. And that is why on Yom Kippur, right before we say the Kol Nidre, right before one of our holiest prayers of the year. An argument could be made, the pinnacle, the holiest prayer is we say Adas Hamakim, Adas Hakol. It says based on the omnipresent and on this holy congregation in the yeshiva of above, in the heavenly yeshiva and the earthly yeshiva, we hereby declare we are permitted to pray with those that sinned. You know what that's referring to? It's not referring to necessarily our congregation, but it's referring to that they're stating that those who were forced to adopt another religion, we're going to pray with them because they were coerced. Because they were coerced, we are going to still include them in our congregation because they were coerced. So it's not talking about somebody who did it willingly, has sold their soul, and has sold their soul to the devil, and that's a whole nother story. Somebody who completely, it's called shmad. They completely turn their back on their religion, and they adopt, and it's no longer monotheistic faith. That's the key, by the way. That's the key. If they turn their back on Judaism, but they're still a monotheist, that's a whole different level than if they're not a monotheist any longer. If they start believing in the God of this and the God of that. But if you're coerced, we're not going to hold it against you. It's sad, and it's worth a good cry, but we're not going to hold it against you. Now, because it's such a sad and tragic. So, and by the way, these anusim, I'm not going to call them Maranos, but these anusim, for hundreds of years, they kept certain things because it was passed down. So on Friday night, even after the Inquisition was over, the girls, the ladies of the house, went down to the basement and lit candles. They don't even know why, but they did because that's what the Anusim used to do. That's what the Maranas used to do, is they had to hide it. And I read this as somebody's personal tale. It's an old book that somebody writes, and I believe that it was this fellow's great-great-grandfather who writes that everybody knew of this particular group, there was a pair of tefillin hidden in the field. And if you wanted to put on tefillin, if you could get away unobserved, you went to this tree in the field and you put on tefillin. And it may have been once a month, once every 2 months. But they were anusim. Outwardly, they had adopted the culture and the faith, but inwardly they were still Jewish people between them and themselves. And if they were caught, that was the worst punishment ever. That was they were made a spectacle of and burnt in the town square. And just a very, very interesting story is that when I was in Madrid, I went to the Plaza Major. It's called the major plaza. There's all stores all around it, and it's this huge center where people just it's called the plaza. So they have concerts there, etc. And so I met up with the rabbi of Madrid, and he takes me to the Plaza Major, and he says, "You know what this is?" I said, "No." He says, "This is where the Order de Fes were. This is where the Jews were burnt at the stake." And I said, "Wow." So he says, "For years I never came here. I always shied away. I felt, how can I walk through? How can I shop here?" And he says, until one day, the chief rabbi of Israel came to visit me, and he asked me to take him to the plaza. So I said, "You go to the plaza?" He says, I went with him to the Plaza Major, and the chief rabbi stands in the middle of the plaza, and as loud as he could, he says, "This is where thousands of Jews were burnt at the stake. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad." And he says, and I never thought to do that. I'm the rabbi of Madrid. I never thought to go to the plaza and say the Shema. So with that, we went to the plaza. We went to the middle of the plaza, and we yelled out the Shema Yisrael. This is where Jews were burnt at the stake. May holy martyrs. This is where they were burnt, because they were caught. That they were Nussim, and they were caught and that was the worst punishment. The inquisitors could the members of the in Fernandad, and who was it? It was Isabel, right? The king and the queen, and the archpriest. I forget his name. So Maimonides says it's not, regardless of them practicing, it's not their fault. Then Maimonides goes into, he gives the example of what would consider in this scenario, which we kind of touched upon, is if they said give us a pretty maiden, so that we may have our way with her. You have to say no. I'm not going to give you the pretty maiden. And he said, well, we'll kill you. He goes, you're going to have to kill all of us because we're not doing it. He says, and likewise, if they say, give us so-and-so that we could kill him, you have to say, no, we're not giving you over so-and-so that you can kill him. And if you want to, you're going to have to come in and kill us all. Because, in order to kill somebody, the Beth Din, the Jewish court of law, and we don't have a Jewish court of law that does this now, but the Beth Din has to go through due diligence. There has to be a trial, and for you to just say, give us somebody, we're not going to do that. It goes against our tenet, and therefore we will not give you this person to be killed, because we don't have the authority, and we feel that you don't have the authority to kill this individual unless they go through a rabbinical court of law, which was only took place in Jerusalem at the time the temple was standing. And it not only in Jerusalem, in order to kill somebody, in the halachas, Maimonides talks about way later, books later, that it's interesting that you need a Beth Din of a minimum of 20 plus people in order to kill somebody. And it has to be, if it's unanimous vote that this person should be killed, then the person is not killed, because how could 23 people or 21 people not find some way to dispute the ruling? And to kill somebody, you have to have at least two more that say, in this 20 or 50 or 70, depends what you have, at least two more that say that he's guilty and should be killed. And if you have one more, then you don't kill him. You need at least two more in order to say that this person is guilty. So you can't just hand over somebody, because there are laws and there are laws. Tomorrow we'll pick this up. Just a fascinating topic. I find it fascinating. I hope you too found it fascinating. To see more of these classes, you can go to the chaycenter.com/academy, and many of our classes are listed there. Thank you.